Welcome. The show is Horizon. I'm your host, Jeffrey Giuliano. You know, when I first saw the devotees of the Hare Krishna movement many years ago, I wondered, like many others, of course, I wondered why they were dancing, playing their musical instruments, banging their drums and their tambourines, and distributing their exotic Eastern literatures out on the street. Well, tonight we're going to be meeting with Professor Joseph O'Connell, who is Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Toronto, and Vishwakarma Das Adhikari, who is President of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in Toronto. Welcome to both of you. Joe, tell me, what is your connection with the Krishna religion?
Well, I have no connection as a member of the temple. Mm-hmm. My interest in it is that of an historian of religion. Mm-hmm. And it was about 12 years ago, when I was in India doing research for my thesis on Krishna worship in India, that I first heard from some of the Indian holy men that there was a new movement in the West, and did I know anything about it? I said, no, I didn't. It was interesting. Our first day back at Cambridge in Massachusetts, the doorbell rang, and some of your fellows from the little temple in Boston were there to greet us. Mm-hmm. Since then, my own historical interest in an earlier period of Krishna history in India has been supplemented by a number of visits to the temples and interest to see how the movement of Krishna piety has in fact spread to the West and evidently has made deep roots.
Yes. Our other guest is Vishwakarma. Vishwakarma, tell me, what is your connection with the Hare Krishna movement?
Well, of course, I'm a devotee at the temple here in Toronto, and I became connected with the temple, Jeff, back in 1970. Mm-hmm. I received one of the earlier editions of our Bhagavad Gita, which was translated by the founder of our movement, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who is my spiritual master now. And by reading the Bhagavad Gita as it is, his particular commentary, I found a wealth of spiritual understanding and enlightenment there about who I was and who God was, etc., that brought me to become interested in the Krishna movement. Mm-hmm. And by further research and study in association with the devotees of the movement, I decided to try it out. That was back in 70 in Hamilton, Ontario, and I can say by Krishna's kindness, I'm still here.
That's wonderful. Joe, getting back to you, mm-hmm. Was this movement manufactured by Bhaktivedanta Swami, or what are the historical roots of the Hare Krishna movement?
Well, manufactured is a horrible word, obviously not. There have been several Indian holy men of the Krishna worshipping strand within the whole Hindu tradition, mm-hmm. who have at different times come to the West and attempted to establish centers to spread their view of religious truth. They've had limited success. Mm-hmm. Swami Bhaktivedanta is the first to have had really a resounding success in establishing numerous centers with deeply trained disciples. But the tradition itself of Krishna worship goes back many centuries. You can go back beyond the time of Christ to the period when the Bhagavad Gita, which features Lord Krishna speaking to Arjuna as one of the earliest texts in the Sanskrit language in the Hindu tradition, where piety, worship to Krishna is very much emphasized. There are less powerful, less clear references to Krishna and to Vishnu, who is theologically closely related to Krishna, yes. Going back even further. But coming this way, I'd say from perhaps the 2nd, 3rd century BC, the time of the Bhagavad Gita, you have a continually developing tradition of piety to Krishna with numerous Sanskrit and then numerous vernacular texts throughout different parts of India. And particularly around 1600, there was a major reshaping of Krishna piety in the Bengali area, mm-hmm. Around Calcutta. And in fact, it was this 16th century and its sequel phase of the Krishna movement that I went to do some study on for my PhD research. And it's out of this 16th century revival of piety and intensification of piety to Krishna that the movement that Bhaktivedanta Swami and other Swamis who were associated through him with his guru Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati have come forward. But it's clearly a tradition with deep roots and continued development in India, and occasionally with attempts to reach beyond India. This one case with Bhakti Vedanta, the one where there seems to have been a real rapport between the teacher and a...
Yes, I'd like to talk about that. And so others have come, and others have not been so successful in establishing the movement of Lord Krishna. Why Bhakti Vedanta? What clicked?
Vishwakarma would tell us, I presume, that it was divine grace at the time was ready, or he might well have some other reasons to give you. And in a sense, perhaps this is what one should say. Looking at it, he came, I believe it was 1965. Did he reach New York or Boston in 65?
That was the beginning of the whole youth movement.
Well, the youth movement, the hippie movement was very much alive at that point, and I think that many of the early disciples, perhaps quite a few of the later ones, but many of the earlier disciples were those who had in one way or another been hippies, been into what's sometimes called the counterculture, had in many cases explored different alternative ways of life, and some of them were ready for a much more coherent and religiously serious way of life, and Bhaktivedanta Swami was able to offer that to him. I still think that the charm of that elderly gentleman itself was a major factor.
So there was a personal rapport between
I think there was between him and his first disciples. Now the movement has clearly grown to the extent that most of those who are in it never saw the Swami before joining it. There's the presentation of the teachings through the books, there's the inviting of people to the temples, there's the experience of seeing others chanting and being uplifted by it. But I do think that even though people haven't seen him individually, that he had a combination of skill, of deep commitment to the tradition, and a love of young persons who were, in their own ways, somewhat on the margin. They were exploring, looking for something different, and this elderly gentleman was able to relate to these in a kind of grandfather, grandson, granddaughter fashion, and I think that was important at the beginning. I'm not saying that he had some magical or sinister control over them. I don't mean that at all. But he was a man that I think you could have a deep sense of trust in if you were looking for someone to be your spiritual guide.
And of course, many were at that time.
Many were at that time.
Now, can you tell me how this Krishna movement has been taken up in India? What are the reactions to it? I mean, obviously it had its origins there. Now we have Bhaktivedanta coming to the West, initiating disciples, and now, if I'm not mistaken, these disciples are going back to India and establishing centers.
Well, they're going back, and they have established a number of centers. I've visited a few of them. In fact, was with Vishwakarma, was it 2 or 3 years ago, at a remarkable occasion. It was an anniversary of the birth of Chaitanya, this great saint in the 16th century, who was, by the way, believed to, by the Krishna devotees thereafter, to have been an incarnation or an avatar, or a human presence of Krishna. But at that time, when I was visiting their temple north of Calcutta at a place called Mayapur, the birthplace of Chaitanya, there were literally tens of thousands of local Indian persons filing through the temple to take darshan or to see the deity. So I'd say that wherever a temple has been established, you have large numbers of Indian lay persons coming to the temple to sometimes hear the discussions, but more simply to come and see the deity and offer their worship.
So there's a spiritual gain just by simply seeing?
Well, this is very much, this is part of popular Hindu piety, and it's certainly a part of piety most anywhere. One thinks of the vast numbers that turned out to see the Pope in his recent visit to North America. Somehow it's important to see and be present. But that's one level. I'd say that also there is a certain inspiration, a sort of bringing of new vitality to other wings of Krishna piety in India, which didn't have that much success overseas, which had a phase earlier in the 20th century of a good deal of revival, but then had had stabilized, hadn't petered out, but you tended to see older people, and I noticed this when I was doing my research, and the idea that young people would be finding life in Krishna important was puzzling and inspiring. It was a lot of people. However, I think one should keep in mind that, by and large, as far as I can tell, Indian persons who would choose to live full-time at a temple would probably prefer to go to a temple that was staffed largely by Indians rather than one largely staffed by the foreigner. There are some differences between the sense of social contact and the sense of spiritual or ritual contact. And at the spiritual or ritual contact, I'd say that within the Krishna tradition generally, the disciples of Bhaktivedanta are gradually being seen to be quite devout, and their temples are places to which people will go. Initially, there was a good deal of questioning, because there's a good deal of questioning in India on the grounds
Western,
of, well, anything Western, and particularly anything Indian religious that's gone west, been picked up by the West and come back. There are a lot of people in India who are a little on the skeptical side, thank heavens, and there's always a certain question as to how serious one or another holy man might be.
Well, let's talk about the, if I may interrupt you for a minute, Joe. Let's talk about the form of worship here in the West by the devotees of Krishna. Now, there is this chanting of mantras, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a repetition of a phrase or a prayer. Could you explain that? What is the significance of this chanting?
Well, there are...
Because this seems to be a question in people's mind.
Okay,
is it brainwashing? Is it mind control?
Well,
or is it spiritual enlightenment? Just what is it?
Well, first of all, theologically, the Krishna tradition in India and many other strands of the Hindu tradition have felt that in sacred words there is a sacred power, and particularly in the Krishna tradition there is a belief that in the names of the deity there is a divine presence, in some way analogous to the sense of divine presence in the image in the temple, or according to some Christian theologies, the divine presence in the bread and wine after it's been consecrated. There is a parallel, I would say, sense of divine presence when the holy names are uttered. So it's said that in the last age of the world, the Kali Yuga, before you have a renewal and you have new ages again, one of the prime ways of divine presence is in the holy name. So there's this theological commitment that goes back a great distance. In addition to that, there is the sense, as I understand it, that by frequently reciting the name, either aloud or quietly, one's mind does in fact become calmed. One becomes aware of divine presence. And this again is something that one finds in many religious traditions. If you will pray for a considerable period of time, there is this calming of the mind, there is a focusing of your awareness on what the meaning of the prayer might be. Now, when you have the excitable singing of the prayer in common, this has a way of drawing the whole community together, and you can see the devotees early in the morning along with their private prayers, gathering and chanting very loudly.
There is the private as well as the congregational chanting.
There are private prayers, there are silent prayers, there are private but oral spoken prayers. There's the common chanting, and that again is something like hymn singing that you'd find in other traditions. You get a sense of the community as a whole isn't operating individually now; it's operating as the group, and this is, as I say, something that you find in many religious traditions, and the Hare Krishna group continues a Krishna sense that there is a special divine presence while the singing or the individual recitation or the inaudible remembering of the names is going on.
Well, now, there's been a lot of talk about the appearance of the devotees. They shave their heads, they wear these robes. People don't understand it. Are they trying to import historical India to the Western culture? How do you see the significance of this? And it seems to upset people a great deal.
It upsets people to have them wearing Indian clothing. It also upsets them if they put Western clothing on after they've had it. So, you know, there's
So
problems either
win.
way. They can't win. But I've sometimes asked them myself. First of all, there is a ritual sense that certain kind of clothing is appropriately worn into the temple.
Yes.
There are traditional Hindu views on what are more and less pure items. For instance, you don't start wearing leather in certain places. You don't wear shoes into the temple.
Right.
It goes further. There are certain fabrics that are thought to be more resistant to pollution. Well, there's this level of it. Now, this wouldn't necessarily affect what they did on the outside, but in the temple you should dress more appropriately, and again, many religious traditions have a sense that within the church or the temple you dress in one fashion. I think there's much more to it, and I'm not sure how much more. I'm always curious as to why the devotees are wearing one set of clothes one day and one another, but I do think that part of the maintaining of the Indian clothing is built into the general decision of Bhaktivedanta Swami to maintain as much as possible of the Krishna way of life.
Yes, I see.
Now, there are different strategies you can use in trying to bring a new religious way to a foreign area. One is to introduce it gradually with just some of the essentials and then build. Another is to say, here it is, here's the whole thing.
Rather, Bhaktivedanta Swami doesn't seem to be a man of much compromise. I mean, he seems to have tried to present it...
he seems to have presented the whole package.
Yes.
And as far as I can see, there has been a gradual shift towards using Western clothing more frequently outside of the temple than in the beginning, and my guess is that this may go on as the group acclimates itself. Each part of the clothing, of course, and the shaving of the head will have its specific meanings.
Yes.
So you can, in a sense, make a sermon or a short course in what the Krishna way of life is all about if you sit down with a devotee and go through why he's wearing this and why he's cut his hair that way. So it has a built-in teaching value to it as well. But of course you can teach other ways, so it may not be essential.
Yes.
And Vishwakarma may be able to tell us when you turn to him, why he wears certain of the clothing at certain times.
Well, Vishwakarma, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, this movement has its origins in India, in the East. Yet you're certainly a Westerner, and I guess the majority of the devotees in your movement are, in fact, Western. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Well, actually, Jeff, the majority of devotees who are devoted to Krishna are not Westerners. We constitute a minority. The fact that the majority of devotees that are involved in the Hare Krishna movement as established by Srila Prabhupada, our founder, I think is significant. Many years ago, our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, received an instruction from his spiritual teacher or guide, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada. He asked him to take the message of Lord Chaitanya, who is an incarnation of Krishna, to the Western speaking countries, to the European and North American speaking countries. So at the age of 70 years, Srila Prabhupada embarked on this mission.
70 years old?
Yes.
He came to America.
Actually, the whole history of his preaching work is being very vividly described in a book being produced now by one of our devotees, Srila Satsarup Das Goswami. It's being published now, and it's expected to describe in 8 volumes Srila Prabhupada's work. Anyway, the idea is that under great hardship, in a very humble way, and a very sincere way, Srila Prabhupada came to the Western world and began preaching the message of love of God given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as per direction of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta. And Professor O'Connell did mention how the 60s seemed to be the most fertile period of time. Coincidentally, we would say it would be Krishna's arrangement, that he had arranged that Prabhupada would meet a group of frustrated young people or inquisitive young people who were looking for God in America. And as a result, by his preaching work, he was able to attract so many Western followers who have taken up his mission with great enthusiasm and determination. And as a result, you're finding that predominantly the organizers or directors of our society are from Western or European backgrounds. But now it's interesting to note, Jeff, that as the movement is developing, we're finding that the Indian people are acknowledging the authenticity of this movement, and they are also coming forward and participating quite actively in our society.
Yeah, that was my next question, is how the Indian population here in the West respond to your work.
Well, for example, one Indian
Are they
gentleman...
active participants?
Yeah, one of the Indian gentlemen in our society, in fact, he's in charge of the Canadian organization, received his degree from McGill University here in Canada.
Yes.
And worked in local business organizations, and since then joined the movement and has become a very important figure in our society. I think that the Indian community, locally here, is responding to our work with great enthusiasm. And during various festivals like Ram Navami, Krishna Janmashtami, Shiva Ratri, these are the various holy days, like the Christians have the Christmas Day, etc.
Mm-hmm.
In India, there's also the birth of Lord Krishna. There's a great festival and holiday. Well, here in Canada, when we celebrate it at our temple, we have up to 3,000 to 4,000 people at times coming and participating in our religious functions.
Mm-hmm.
So I could say that the Indian people, as they become more aware of us, by contacting the temple, reading the books, and seeing the work that we're doing, are supporting the activities of the movement. That regardless of one's social position, whether he be born as this is a technical term, whether he be born as a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or Shudra, regardless of these particular positions, which sometimes still exist in India.
Yes.
This is called the caste system. And regardless of one's social position, if he takes to the chanting of Hare Krishna, he can reawaken his love for God. So in India also we see that because of the influence of modern materialistic societies, and more broadly because of the influence of the Kali Yuga, people are giving up religion to a certain extent, especially in the city. So we're trying to introduce the chanting of Hare Krishna there and bring people once again back into the religious fire of bhakti and come closer to God.
Vishwakarma, we're running out of time here. I'd like to, I know you've brought along with you a slideshow which depicts some of the work you've been doing, and I think now, if we may, we'll take a look at that.
The message of the Vedas, India's ancient spiritual and philosophical text, is that the human form of life is meant for reviving our original God consciousness through the practice of spiritual discipline. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is a worldwide non-sectarian movement dedicated to propagating this message for the benefit of mankind. The society was founded in 1966 by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who had come to the United States to teach Krishna consciousness in the Western world. Over the years, ISKCON has steadily grown in popularity and influence, and today it is widely recognized by theologians, scholars, and laymen as a genuine and important spiritual movement. The spiritual master and founder of ISKCON, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, is a leader of substantial erudition and integrity. As the current representative of an unbroken chain of self-realized spiritual masters reaching back to Lord Krishna himself, ISKCON is an educational, cultural, and philosophical movement with nearly 100 centers in 30 countries throughout the world. The members of ISKCON are of all ages. The unifying characteristics that bring such diverse individuals to Krishna consciousness are high ethical standards and a sincere desire to understand spiritual truth. The Krishna conscious lifestyle is based on the principle of simple living and high thinking. Devotees spend the morning hours in meditation, attending classes in the profound and practical philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada's translations of these two Vedic classics are regarded by many scholars as the most erudite and authoritative available. During the day, the main activity is preaching Krishna consciousness. Many devotees go out to the public places to distribute the Society's books and its official journal, Back to Godhead magazine, which has a monthly circulation of more than 1 million copies in 13 languages. To date, the BBT has published a total of 60 400-page hardbound volumes, each profusely illustrated with original paintings by devotee artists. Devotees engage in a wide variety of activities. The qualification in Krishna consciousness is not the kind of work one performs, but that it be done in the spirit of devotion to God. In the United States and other countries, ISKCON has established a series of rural ashrams. Avoiding modern farm machinery as far as possible, they demonstrate that a human being need not depend on the artificial economy of the city. He can live peacefully and simply in the country while pursuing a spiritual life. Throughout the world, the Krishna Conscious Society has been recognized for its cultural and welfare activities. Mayors and law enforcement officials in major metropolitan areas have praised the Society for its success in helping young people overcome drug dependence. Addictions magazine declares, Krishna consciousness is close to 100% successful in stopping drug use. The mayor of San Francisco has proclaimed a Rath Yatra Day in honor of the spectacular festival held annually by ISKCON. Thus, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, a dynamic and effective spiritual movement, is making a significant and valuable contribution to the intellectual, cultural, and spiritual life of contemporary man.
Well, that's our show. I hope we've answered some of your questions on the Hare Krishna movement. Vishwakarma, would you like to give some information as to how people can contact you if they like?
Yes, downtown Toronto, 243 Avenue Road. We have a temple, a feast every Sunday at 5:30, classes in the evening at 7. And if anyone wants to contact us by phone, 922-5415.
Vishwakarma Das Adhikari, Professor Joseph O'Connell, thank you for being with us.
Hare Krishna.